the Northern Clay Center. I'm Sam Gonzalez-Longleat. I am the education manager here. And I have the privilege of getting to help coordinate our related events for this exhibition that opened today, a gathering work from contemporary Black American ceramic artists. And we are here with Sharon Norwood and Ashlyn Pope. Welcome, you two. We're so thrilled to have you here. For those of you in person, welcome to our library at NCC. We have a plethora of folks joining us online. Welcome virtually. I would like to just start by respectfully acknowledging that Northern Clay Center is located on Dakota land. And I would also like to take a moment to thank our funders and share that this activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board operating support grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Trust. Welcome, girl, come on in. Additional funding for this exhibition comes from Prospect Creek Foundation and Wingate Foundation. So we are, again, so excited to be kicking off this prominent exhibition with this discussion from Sharon and Ashlyn. The exhibition, A Gathering, Works from Contemporary Black American Ceramic Artists, is now open as of this morning and runs through Sunday, October 30th. A Gathering is an exhibition featuring the works of 36 artists based on the book, Contemporary Black American Ceramic Artists, recently published by Chotsani Elaine Dean, who is joining us tonight, and Donald A. Clark, who also have served as curators for this exhibition. In their words, this exhibition represents hope in spite of the ambiguity of plans falling apart, as well as being disrupted by the pandemic, an act of faith that in times of turbulence, the pursuit of bringing artists and their work together can ignite change, a space and invitation for viewers to be in conversation with the artists, and an opportunity to see a diverse spectrum of work made by Black Americans who all came to clay in their own way. Northern Clay Center is honored to host this historic exhibition, and upon conclusion of its first run here in Minneapolis, the gathering will continue its impact by traveling to partners on both U.S. coasts at the Museum of Fine Arts in Springfield, Massachusetts, and at Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California. Whew, sorry, y'all. Breathing with a mask on was a little intense. I'm just going to take a deep breath quick. But I still get to introduce our lovely artists tonight. So joining us today are two artists featured in the book and the exhibition, Sharon Norwood and Ashlyn Pope, our first two visiting artists from this exhibition, and here to share an important and intimate conversation surrounding the work they make. An original idea imagined by Chotsani Elaine Dean, the discussion tonight, Black Bodies and Metaphor in Clay, will explore the ways Norwood and Pope use clay as a tool of expression and celebration of Blackness and Black bodies, and the role that clay plays in this connection. Our artists will, of course, be sharing more about themselves and their work shortly, but we do like to offer brief bio statements for each artist so that all you're about to hear is put into context for you. So Ashlyn Pope is an African-American artist of Gullah descent, mainly working with ceramics, textiles, and printmaking, and using these mediums to tell a narrative of mental and physical confinement, restriction, limitation, and hope for the future of Black bodies in America. Clay became instrumental in her work while attending Kennesaw State University, where she eventually earned a BFA in ceramics and printmaking. She went on to complete her master's degree in ceramics at Pennsylvania State University. Currently, Pope is a professor at Coastal Carolina University and is associate director of Charles Joyner Institute for Gullah and African Diaspora Studies. Sharon Norwood is an artist of Caribbean descent born in Jamaica, whose work spans several mediums, including painting and ceramics, and seeks to challenge common narratives of race, gender, beauty, and class. Norwood holds a BFA in painting from the University of South Florida and an MFA in studio art from Florida State University. She has exhibited internationally in Canada, Germany, and the United States and Jamaica. Noted achievements include an artist presentation at the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida, participation at the National Gallery of Jamaica's 2012 and 2017 biennials, and SECA's 2016 Jury Student Exhibition, and the 2016 Atlanta Biennial. Biennial among many. All right, I know we are greatly anticipating this discussion tonight, so I'm going to hand it over to the artists. Thank you both so much, and Sharon's going to start us out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look, I won't go into my intro because Samantha did a little bit of that for me, but I just wanted to thank the Northern Trade Center and Shastani for inviting us to participate in this talk. And yeah, so I'll start. Carl, you're all set for me?
Almost there.
Okay. I'm a little nervous. I usually start off really nervous, and then by the time I get to the third slide, it's like not. So
Would you mind speaking a little louder?
sure, let me try.
I know that.
This thing is so hard. Okay, is that a little bit better? Just giving a little more room in there. Okay, so a bit about my undergrad. Okay, so the first image that I'm sharing with you, I'm sharing with you because I feel like it's significant in the work that I make. And I'll go on to talk about exactly what it is I'm making, how it's similar. And I feel like this image kind of speaks to, like, even though my work has become like very abstracted, and in this iteration here it's very figurative, the work that I make is sort of derived from this concept of kind of like when I think of my work, I think about consumption, I think about Black bodies and consumption, and I think about Black bodies also operating in this space, in a colonial space, where they're having to adjust to like a colonial, or respond to like a colonial kind of narrative. So that's the first image, and that's an undergraduate work. So as Samantha was saying, that I am an interdisciplinary artist. We'll go to the second slide, and that's the one more up. And so on the left, you'll see one more up.
To the swing.
To the swing, yeah. Other way.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
Big.
So on the left is an image that I like to present in my talk. And the reason why I do is that I feel like a lot of my work definitely like responds to that historical kind of magical kind of space that we see in the Rococo painting. So the painting by Fragonard to me is like this imagined space about beauty and stuff. And when I look at that painting, it reminded me of my hair. So I started this body of work by thinking about self-portraiture, and just really like curating my space to try and see if I could find something that would represent self. And at the time when I was doing the work, one of the things that was happening was that my hair was shedding a lot, and I was like, young girl, like thinking about beauty and thinking about myself. And as a Black woman, I think just about any woman, hair is such a big part of culture. And so I was thinking about all of these negative ideas and associations that I had with hair, and my hair in particular. And I think at the time I was thinking about drawing hair, but drawing it in a way that I was kind of not bring all these negative associations, learned associations. And I think I considered it negative or positive, because sometimes I felt like the positive associations were also negative associations, because it's kind of like saying, oh, your hair is supposed to be soft, right? That sounds very positive, right? But what does it mean if your hair is soft? Does that mean that the hair is bad, right? So I was thinking about drawing this material hair and taking photographs of my hair and drawing it in a very sort of very objective way. And I thought about, the line, all these things that I learned in my undergrad, like, follow the line, the mark, and stuff like that, right? So I was drawing the hair, and initially I did about 13 drawings, not knowing if the mark would realize as hair. And then I was surprised that that people were reading it as hair. And not only were they reading it as hair, they were reading it as Black hair. And so my Black friends would look at it and they would be like, oh, that's the hair when it's falling out of the brush, or that's the hair. And so that was really inspiring for me, because it made me realize that this material had a universal appeal. And so that's kind of where I started going off in terms of abstraction and metaphors. So I guess my first metaphor in terms of Black bodies was, here's an object that I could take that could universally represent Black bodies, right? So I think I heard myself saying curly, not straight, right? So the curly lines became like this representation of Black bodies for me, right? So that's how I first started thinking about the work. Some other thing that was really exciting to me about the work was that it was about drawing. And I liked that it was about drawing because as an art student, I felt like drawing was this democratic space. All you needed was a pencil. Everybody had access, and there wasn't really this life kind of stuff about permissions and who has access. So that was also very exciting to me when I started making the work. So after I started making this work, hair, and recognized, folks were recognizing this curly material as Black hair, I thought about, okay, how could I bring this to a ceramic space? And so one of the ways that I thought about doing that was, I thought about, for instance, these objects that I paired my drawings to are utilitarian objects that are found in the world that have these very specific, that's one. These utilitarian objects that have these very specific meaning, and they've got this history, this embedded history that's easily recognizable. People see it and they're like, oh, that's a porcelain teacup, but they understand that. So then what does it mean when you marry the curly line to these very precious, porcelain objects? What kind of ideas does that bring about, right? And so I was thinking about, the fact that porcelain, within the history of porcelain, and it's got a long history, but there is this history of white supremacy, in terms of like, I think it was Hitler embraced it as this ideological kind of meaning behind how the master race kind of thing. So for me, it was like, okay, well, what does it mean when you pair the curly marks to these objects? Is it making the work better? Is it destroying the work? And I think for me, in my process of making, it was definitely, I didn't want the lines to change the usefulness or the functionality or the way the objects is being used. So how I did that was I transferred my marks to these decal material, and then it's fired onto the surface of these found objects, right? So the objects still retain their usefulness. It's still a cup, you can still drink out of it, but now it has this added thing to it. And for me, that was like just thinking about that, it was about being a part of a space and not being a part of the space. So I those were some of the layered understanding that I started to think about the work. Like, if I were perhaps in another place, another time, I might be serving these, it might be at a table where I'm serving folks off of these precious items, and I might be like the White House, for instance, Black bodies has been there for years, but there's no evidence of us there, very little evidence of us. So I thought about that space, like being a part of a space, but not being a part of a space. And what does that mean? And one of the things I love, I really inspired me about the work is that I like that it's a quiet kind of work. I feel that it is something that folks look at and they have to like bring their personal self and history of these objects to this thing. And I think somewhere along the way of sort of negotiating what it is I'm looking at, they have to kind of confront their own history and personal thoughts about this space and how they feel about that, which I kind of like, because I figured it's a space that people can kind of like, just be sort of very truthful in terms of their comfort or discomfort to this kind of imagery. Am I talking too fast?
No, it sounds just right.
So again, initially, like I said, I started with these objects, and at the time I didn't know whether or not this was art or how to display it or how it would live in the world. But I was definitely very inspired to like make these connections. And I think some of the things I was thinking about was the whole idea about tea time, and the respectability about tea, there's a movie with Sidney Poitier that says, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Mm-hmm. And I think some of the stuff I was thinking about is, guess who's coming to tea? Kind of thing. So there was a lot of these layered way for me to sort of negotiate my way, myself, and negotiate my way and understanding in the world, and maybe to take some agency in terms of saying the thing that I want to say in a way that I'm not going to be interrupted or challenged, Yeah, so that's some of that. What else do I want to say about this?
If you could speak a little more slowly,
Okay,
I, for one, would appreciate.
okay, thank you. Yeah, when I get nervous, I'll try to slow down a little bit. Okay, so initially when I was working with these materials, the next one, please. I was thinking about just black and white and keeping my language very simple. So I wasn't using any color, and I was thinking black and white because, you know, to me that was like a really nice way to be to have a very simple conversation. And again, also, I think when I started making the work out, it was really building a language. So initially, when I started making these marks, I wasn't sure if people would read it as black hair. And so initially I was using these very signifiers, like the bobby pin was something that I placed in the object so that people would anchor, you know, it wouldn't be seen as thread or like fiber, you know, they would get that this is talking about hair. And now I don't necessarily use it anymore. I don't use that those markers or signifiers as much anymore. And in fact, I think my earlier works, I was very concerned about the quality of the line. It had to be a certain thickness. Now I'm not so much anymore because I feel like my audience now has the idea that these marks are representative of the Black body, like the Black person that we're talking about, is, I think, pretty much cemented in the mind of my audience or the folks who are familiar with the work. So the work basically does, for me, question or challenge this idea of who belongs, you know? Okay, the next one. Next image. So the next image, and this one is a teapot, and it's similar, it's having a similar conversation as the other image, as the other works. I think in this particular iteration, I was thinking about color. And you know, before that, all my works were pretty much black and white. And so I was thinking about color and thinking about what that meant, you know, how would I introduce color? And I think for me, definitely there's this gendered thing about the work. I'm married and female, you know, and I always feel like I'm, you know, there's a space as a woman that we sort of are supposed to occupy as, you know, pink for girls, blue for boys. So those were the kind of the things that I was trying to challenge in this work. Or, you know, one of the things I've been saying is that my work is kind of interrogating the domestic space. You know, many times, many days and nights, I consider myself like this failed housewife. I've been trying, but there's this thing, and I feel also that even that thinking is like, you know, it's like the colonialist kind of world that we set up for ourselves, and then we have to like kind of mold our bodies to fit that. So in these works, I think sometimes it's like me perhaps like being very aggressive about kind of negating that space or challenging that space or questioning that space of femininity. And how do I do that? I do that by taking these very precious items that, you know, you would see in your grandmother's cabinet that maybe you wouldn't be, it would only come out at special dinners, or it would come out, you'd get it as a wedding present. And so what does it mean when, you know, you have my body all over it? You know, is it, you know, what does that say? Like, how does that, you know, how does it make you question the way you participate in that space, or the way you allow others to participate in that space? The next one. So again, this is more of the same. And just to give you a little bit, again, I think I mentioned a little bit about my process. A lot of these works are fired like multiple times, like some of these are fired 30 times, 20 times. I think initially when I first making them, I didn't realize I could layer them as initially. So I would, with these works, I consider these found objects as a canvas. So instead of using a painting canvas, these become a space for me to make work. So each of the works are like these original designs, and one mark informs the other. And I think that's interesting too for me, because it kind of mirrors this, there's this language that W.E. Du Bois speaks about, where he speaks about this double consciousness about how, you know, to be a Black person in America, you're always very conscious of your body in space. You're always very conscious about, you know, this belonging, so these works become like my way to sort of like participate, but also to question, the space that I occupy as a person of color, as a Black person of color, Black woman. Okay, so more, the next one, okay, again, this is a little bit more of the same. Again, and some of these my objects, the hair definitely takes over the form. And if you're wondering why hair, again, I think I mentioned hair is something that everybody has, and whether we cut it, whether we we groom it, it all has so much implications in terms of our cultural history, like how we what are whether you're young or old, like young girls are expected, you can wear ponytail and all this stuff in your hair. As a woman, you may not do that. A married person may, in certain culture, would kind of like you could tell looking at them that they're married versus single. So that's one of the reasons why I started using hair in my work, because I felt like it was a universal thing that everyone can connect to at some way, whether you're losing it or you're not losing it, or so that was something that's been very much a part of my research, creative research. Okay, let me see. So the next one, and these images are a little bit different from the others, but I feel like it's still the same. With these images here, I'm definitely using my hands, and I'm, it's not so much the found object. So I'm using my hand on the material, and I'm like, making these curls out of these not slabs, these kind of coils. And I feel like it's the same in a way that it indexes my body, because there's a certain gesture. My gesture mark is indexed in the material where you can see the touch. And I feel like that's similar to my hand-drawn gestures, like the marking that I do in my marks are similar in terms of the gesture, the unique gesture, I call it, right? So these works, I feel like even though they are not the teacup, they still are abstracting that same language about belonging, about respectability. And also with these beautiful words, like when you look at it, it's ornate, it's pretty. And a lot of those types of words were something that I wanted to be a natural part of the Black body experience, like to look at it, say, oh, that's beautiful, oh, that's gorgeous. Those are some of the kinds of things I wanted to marry with the work, because I think for me, just having that be something that is just a natural order, and not something that's like, just not something that's like out of the ordinary. So I was trying to make, and what I say, I mentioned, I was trying to make the insignificant significant. Because like hair falling out of your head is something that we discard, and that we're not really, you don't really think about the hair that leaves your body, right? So it's this insignificant thing, right? But I wanted to take that insignificant thing and make it something significant. And I suppose that for me, that sort of connects myself, not just to my own personal still life iteration of myself in the world, but also maybe it could sort of be broadened to like a general audience, where not just persons of color could relate, but all other people, other cultures also could relate to this material, and this way of trying to sort of like make sense in a world, in this colonial world that doesn't always like uplift like persons of color, in terms of the history. Okay. Or the next one is the same, is similar. And with these ones, I feel like I was like having a little bit more fun. And I think as a Black woman, I'm definitely in the space sometimes where, I'm dealing with these very sort of hard issues, but at the same time, I am a woman, I'm a person, and it's not always heavy, there's always this space that even though you're navigating these landmines, you still are, enjoying life and be existing in a world in like a positive way. And so with some of these ones, these allowed me a way to sort of play, in the world, and just participate in ceramic without it being, you know, real heavy, even though it is heavy. And that I feel like that's like mirrors being a Black woman. You know, it is a heavy world. You know, when you go to a job interview, you don't know who's going to be on the other side, if they're going to accept you, but you still have to show up and be, you know, to live and participate in the world. So these works allow me to do that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, these works allow me to do that. This one is a gold luster. It's a very large scale, and I'm just like thinking about the hair and thinking about my drawings and how, you know, when Black hair is in its natural form, how it tends to like to lock in onto itself and like bend and wind back in itself. And like being able to like, I know when I started making the work, it was really funny to me that people would be sitting in a room and looking at me talking about Black hair, like this really insignificant thing, you know? So this is a way for me, again, to elevate that, you know, to elevate that space and maybe some kind of homage, reverence, some agency, you know, kind of empowerment kind of thing. Yeah, the next one. And this one here, it's got a very long title, and I'm going to read it to you just so you can see just the joy that this work brings me. The title is called "The Flower Offered of Itself and Eloquently Spoke of God. Let us dance in the sun, wearing flowers in our hair." And I just, you know, I mean, I just love that, because for me, it's, again, it was like, you know, like it's trying to escape that political space, you know, and just exist in a space that can be celebrated without the baggage, but also still recognizing that you are underneath that umbrella of something that's, you know, you're still trying to break out of. Next one. So this is, this kind of takes us to the work that I have in the exhibition currently. And this work, again, is a little bit more fun. I think I'm, from where I began in the work like really, really heady. And I still feel like I'm still a little heady with it, but now I feel like I'm like really beginning to sort of relax and enjoy making the work. And definitely I'm in these works, I'm thinking about materials. I've got, you know, flocking on there. I've got the overglaze, the language that ceramic folks know. I've got overglaze, I've got lusters happening. And, you know, it is a modular piece, which means that it has to be put together. So there's always this like joke there for me, because it's kind of like, don't play with my hair, but at the same time the curator is forced to literally like put these little things together in a way that they have to be like mindful that, you know, that that things aren't falling and breaking. So it's kind of like, again, like I suppose there's a lot of agency. And then for me, it's like when I think about my practice, I've been thinking that it's a way for me to articulate the way I think about things in the world. So, you know, when things are like, you know, depending on what's happening, it allows me a space for me to like maybe kind of like work things out in a way, like, you know, how do I feel about this, you know, like, you know, and like with this piece, definitely celebrating Blackness and celebrating like, you know, Black natural hair, and, you know, elevating it in a way that people can look at it and say, wow, that's really beautiful. So that is pretty much what my work is about. We can look at some of these other pieces. And these are just close-ups that I've taken for you to get a quick look at. And that is it for Miss Sharon today.
All right, everybody. So I guess it's my go. And so I guess I wanted to start off just kind of explaining that I am a person who has always been very studious. And because I was a very studious person, like when I went to undergrad, I double majored and minored. I was an art history minor with a double major in ceramics and printmaking. So I made myself a very busy person, but it's because I love learning. And art history to me was kind of just a catalyst for understanding what it is that I was creating. And I fell in love with the way art history approached symbolism. And so symbolism for me is everything. My work is full of symbols and they have dual meanings. Duality for me is absolutely everything. It needs to kind of sit in a space where I can begin to view work from multiple perspectives. And if I don't see a reason why something should exist in my work, if it doesn't have these dual meanings, I go ahead and pull it out. It's not something that should sit in my work if I can't myself see it from different perspectives. And so being that I loved art history and I love history on top of that, I began to kind of, especially when looking at metaphors in clay, I had to try to figure out where my metaphors are coming in because they're all over the place. And I realized that for me, metaphor is in form, metaphor is in surface, and metaphor is in the way that I present work to my audience. And so that is kind of how I decided to kind of split this apart for you guys a little bit. So some of the images that you'll see in the beginning are some early works, but you may also see some newer works showing up, and then vice versa towards the end. So it's a more haphazard movement through, but I promise I will keep you on track. All right, so this piece here, the reason why this piece shows up in my work is because this piece was the catalyst for all of the work that I'm currently making. This piece I made during graduate school, and if I remember correctly, I want to say there's about 150 cups on there. And it was about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide by the time I was done. And this piece became a catalyst because at this time, I had already gone through this period where I felt very stagnant in my work. And I mean, I'm in grad school, I'm making work, but it didn't feel like mine. It felt like someone else's. And I needed to kind of break out of that. And I ended up doing a workshop at Haystack, and then finally, like the professor that I was taking at Haystack kind of opened my mind to the thing that other people had already been saying, my professors had already been saying to me. But you know, somebody says it once and then all of a sudden it clicks, right? And this was a click moment for me. And what she said to me, and then now this person is Courtney M. Leonard, an incredible artist. Courtney. Yep. Now, Courtney was an incredible person for me because what she said to me is like, first, she just listened to me talk. She listened to me talk about my work and I showed her images and she stayed quiet the entire time. And she was like, okay, now I'm going to make you stop. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, the one thing you keep repeating is space. Well, what is space to you? And I'm like, oh, snap. You know, like, I don't know. You know, I don't know what space means to me. And she's like, I don't need you to answer right now. She's like, but I want you to ponder on that because she's like, you use this word space so much when you're talking about your work that you need to understand what it means. And so I then went back to grad school from this wonderful break I took. And I started kind of figuring out what space meant. At least to me, what space meant. And what space meant to me is when I thought about bodies or my Black body in this world, I thought about all of these restrictions and limitations and bindings and ceilings and these things that I just couldn't understand why they existed in the first place, right? And so I wanted space to become something different. I wanted to change space. And so while trying to change space, to me, what I understood, at least from my perspective, was education was the way that I changed space. If I know more, I can do better, right? And so I started kind of researching for this piece. This piece, I was inspired by the Brooks print. It's a print of an interior dissection of a slave ship. It's the first print that ever existed that dissected a slave ship. And looking at it, it's inaccurate. It is the most inaccurate thing you'll ever look at. However, what it did is it changed everything. It was an image that spread across Europe and caused the breaking of the transatlantic slave trade. And I was like, oh, knowledge, right? Yes, we like knowledge, right? And so I was like, well, how do I bring that knowledge to my audience? Because I think this is an important piece of history that we should know, especially Black history, right? And so I was like, okay, well, let's bring it. But I had to do it my way, right? And I'm a ceramic artist, and I started kind of trying to understand what I needed to do to bring this forward. And for me, it was cups. Cups made sense. Cups always made sense. One, because when I think about a cup to me equates body. The reason it equates body, or in particular Black bodies, is because cups are a thing in our life that it just exists with invisible labor. We use them constantly, and we discard them just as quickly as we use them. We put them to the side. They end up in a sink. They end up in a trash. They end up somewhere until we need them again. And to me, that equated exactly what Black bodies experiences were like throughout American history until today. We use them until we need them, or we use them up until we don't need them, push them to the side, and then grab them again when we need them, right? And that's a Black body in America. It's always been a Black body in America. So I was like, okay, yeah, cups is it. Cups is it. Cups are this invisible labor. We drink and we discard. Black body. And so then also, when I thought about cups or just clay in general, clay made sense. So I've always worked with many different materials, always will, okay? But for me, going into clay made sense because I also grew up religious. I consider myself more spiritual now than necessarily religious, but I grew up religious. I grew up in an African Methodist Episcopalian church. It's a mouthful, but it is a church that, you know, round your body up, you know? But the one thing I do remember distinctly as a kid is sitting in a pew and my pastor talking about the relationship between Black bodies, or bodies, period, and earth. And God made man from earth. And I'm like, well, clay is earth. So clay makes sense. Clay is the only way for me to go on this. And so when I thought about invisible labor and Black bodies, it made sense to end up bringing cups in. And so this image I took also in grad school, kind of before I actually finished the first piece, but while the piece I just showed you guys, but while I was in the midst of making it, and I took this picture just kind of summed up the whole idea for me. It was the relationship between the invisible scars or left scars on my cup matched the rope bound of the body sculpted in the back, but then it also matched the lines in my hands. They were the same thing. And so there was no way for me to mistake body for anything else other than using clay. Using clay was the only way I could go. And so I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about the cup that exists in here and this invisible binding that no longer exists on the skin. And so I bind my cups. And the reason I bind my cups is because I wanted to go through the experience that my ancestors have been through before it to actually equate itself to the same type of history they had. So in order to do that, I throw my cups, I bind them, and then from the inside, I push out and distort their body. But it's a distortion that is forced, right? It's a forced distortion, which is what exactly Black bodies had been through, a forced distortion of who we were as people, right? And so to me, those two things went hand in hand. And so I unbound them. I didn't leave the ropes on. If I was wanting to talk specifically about my ancestors, I could have easily left the rope on. But I wanted to talk about the contemporary now at the same time. So I unbind them, because there's this thing right now, today, where it seems like we might be free, but then there's the experiences that we actually have to deal with shows that we are not, right? And so what I'm looking to do is relate the past and the present, show that there's still these parallels that exist. I am no longer physically bound like the sculpture in the background, but I still have scars left on me from that. And I'm dealing still with the distortion that was forced, right? So that is why this image randomly just kind of shows up in here. But it's an important image to me, and I wanted to make sure that I shared that with you guys. And so now at the same time, this to me is a part of the surface, metaphors and surface, but my clay body itself. So as you saw in the first image and this second image, I was trying to produce a brown that would actually speak to Black bodies. And the thing about that is that it wasn't working. What I was doing wasn't working. I love that I was able to get different tones in the first piece, that I really wanted to show that Blackness exists in many different colors. And that came across. But I was like, oh man, I want to see some chocolate, And I'm like, but there's nothing really chocolate. I want chocolate, And at this time, let me also explain a little bit about how I was spending my time. I was doing a lot of research. I was researching a lot. I mean, I was reading W.E.B. Du Bois. I was listening to James Baldwin. I was reading Bell Hooks. I was reading all of these things that were kind of like just pulling me into Blackness. And at the same time of reading some things about these really heavy pasts and reading about my ancestors, I was falling in love at the same time. I mean, I'm looking at pictures and I'm just like, ooh, that chocolate, right? I want this chocolate. And so I struggled with that. I tried so many different clay bodies, just trying to get a brown that to me spoke to the skin that I was falling in love with, right? And I just couldn't come up with it. I couldn't do it. And I got so lucky that I had a friend who was in our studio, but he knew ceramic material well, and he could do anything, right? And I loved when one day he walks into my studio and he goes, Ashlyn, he said, I think I found that chocolate for you. And I was like, did you? And so he brings his sample in, because he also, not only did he mix it, he fired it to test it. And he brings it in and he was like, you can absolutely have this recipe because I know you need it. And I was like, oh my God, you're the best person ever, And so then I started producing work that in this chocolate skin that spoke to me. And when it came out of the kiln, it's very close to a Yixing clay body. So it's tight. It is watertight. And I love that. And I don't have to do anything. I don't have to glaze it. I don't have to do it could just exist as itself. And that is so exciting to me, because Black bodies should just get to exist as themselves, right? And so that I wanted that all day long. And so when I pulled it out of the kiln, I was like, this is incredible. This is what I've needed. And so the clay body became an instrument, a surface decoration technique that I could have never figured out had I not had people support me through it. And I'm just so grateful for that. And so then I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about surface. So I illustrate a lot. I love drawing. I've been drawing, if you ask my mother, since I was 2 years old. She's like, you grabbed a pencil and she said, I couldn't pry it out of your hands. And I was like, yeah, no, I know. And because that's the way my brain operated. I operated in this creative space, and I needed to do it all the time. And my mom made her crazy. Let me just explain how bad it was really quickly. Okay. My mom, when I would get in trouble, my punishment was to put the sketchbook down and have to go outside and play. So let's just explain that, okay? So this for me, drawing became something that needed to be a part of my work. And so I began to illustrate on the surfaces of my pieces, and I began to illustrate with cotton. And cotton for me was, of course, important. There's many different connections why cotton became important for me. For one, my grandmother is in her 70s, her mid to late 70s. And she, as a little girl, she would tell me stories that at 6 years old, she's in the cotton fields picking cotton, and she's coming home with her fingertips bleeding. She's a kid and she's still alive. You mean you were out there picking cotton with your own hands? And she's like, yes. And that to me was wild. And so I just recently moved back into the same state with my grandmother, and I asked her again. And this time something made me go, well, Grandma, when did you stop picking cotton? Well, she tells me that she was 18. That blew my mind. because she had my mom shortly thereafter. So that was a lot for me to process, because this is a modern day. This is not a time period so far back that we can't remember. This is in her lifetime, and she's still alive enough to tell me. And so cotton, instrumental in my work in that sense, looking at my grandmother's history. But also, to me, cotton is just a flowering plant. We have history with it. It is just a plant. So it had the potential of just being beautiful. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to create a surface that was beautiful, enticing, that called everyone. We all know ceramics with flowers on the surface, right? Ceramics with flowers on the surface, we deem to be beautiful. Well, why can't my flower be beautiful? It's cotton. We just have a different history with it, right? And so with the history of cotton, I knew that was going to come into play, and I wanted it to, but I drew it in a way that it takes you a moment to have to realize that it's cotton that you're looking at. Because at first, all I want you to see is beauty. That brown skin with beauty on it. That's what I want you to see first. And so it is what you get. And then all of a sudden, the rest of this stuff starts to pile onto you, where you start seeing the cotton and understanding the experience, what it is like to have Black skin and have cotton illustrated against it, whether or not cotton actually is supposed to be there or not. So also, as I started going and kept going and making art, cotton, of course, stays on my surface. It's a motif that I see that needs to always be there, because like I said, you can see it as this beautiful flower, or you can see its history, right? And so it's always going to exist for me. That duality makes sense. And it ties to my familial history. But also, when I started working on the surface, it didn't fully settle enough to me to have just this cotton on the surface. Like, because it's beautiful, but it's also not something that actually speaks to my ancestry, my people from Africa. I want to see my people from Africa show up in my work. I want to see that, because I am Gullah, and there are traditions that are still African within my people, and I want to see it. And so when I started illustrating with the surfaces, I wanted to do something that emulated the carved scarification that they do for beauty in Africa. I wanted to see that. So I started doing more patterns. I slip trailed instead of just drawing with underglaze on the surface now. Slip trailing so that when you touched it, you also had the tactile feeling of something raised. Because the point in Africa, when they do this scarification, is to raise the skin. It was a beautification. They were beautification marks. Mm-hmm. They saw it as beautiful. And so I wanted to do that. And so I needed it raised. And so I produced things that were raised. But then the duality that needed to exist for me within that piece and doing that was that I'm looking at the beautiful scarification done on the bodies of the people from Africa. But then I'm looking at the scarification created by whips on the backs of ex-slaves from America. Because at the end of the day, I'm still American. That history is mine. I don't know my African relatives. I only know my American ones. And so it needed to exist in both spaces. Me seeing the beauty of Blackness and scarification, and seeing that ugly side at the same time. And so as I kept working, I started kind of doing and spending more time researching outside of America too. I wanted to just understand Blackness on a global scale a little bit more as well, and what the experiences were like kind of across the world. And I started reading more and more, looking more first at ceramic history. I was paying attention to ceramic history, and that's when I kind of, it dawned on me, Delftware, this Delftware exists. And then I was like, ooh, Delftware's from the Belgians. Ooh, what did the Belgians do? Well, they plundered Africa, right? And so they went into the Congo and did some very brutalized things, but they created some very beautiful ceramics. And I needed that to show up. And so I started creating where I started kind of pulling back on some of the surface decoration. And now I make all of this work still. It's just I move in and out of different pieces and bodies of work, right? And so this piece, I wanted something more simplified where you saw the scars, where you actually saw the marks left from the rope very clearly. I wanted them to not be distracted or be overwhelmed by anything else that comes on the surface of the work. And so what I started doing was slicing into the bodies of these pieces, because I also started reading about how some scarifications were created in Africa, where they sliced the skin and they rubbed ash into it in order to produce some of the raised but also change of color on the skin, so that the marks were more visible. And so I was like, oh, that's a really intriguing concept. And I appreciate the fact that that this is how they were doing this, but how can I utilize it in my own work? And so I started slicing the skin of my pieces. And then I was like, well, let's bleed ceramic history. So we started bleeding Delftware. And so there's this white glaze kind of oozing out of the body. It's slip so that I could paint on top of it. But then I started illustrating imagery on top of it. And I didn't want to, of course, like worry about needing to dive into the Delft images, because it's not about the Delft images. We know it's blue and white. Blue and white pottery, we know, is very famously Delftware for the most part. And so I wanted to make sure that I just stuck to the blue and white. It didn't need to match in anything else but the blue and white, if for anyone else to potentially pick up on that information that I'm talking or drawing from ceramic history or Delftware. And so I instead painted the cotton on those pieces. And if you can tell, they're very tiny, very tiny painted images of cotton on that surface. I have to admit, that was probably harder than doing any of the bigger pieces, trying to find a paintbrush so small that I can get into those little tiny spaces. But I actually fell in love with these kinds of pieces, these particular pieces, because it kind of combined my love for ceramics and history in a way that I hadn't tried before. And so these pieces definitely begin to dive into metaphor in a similar way, but slightly different from what I was producing. As I got towards the end of, let's see, almost 2 years ago now, I was ending my residency at the Lawrence Art Center in Kansas. And I got to a point, this was now after George Floyd, and I was sick and tired of seeing news of Black bodies in streets. And I wanted other people to see that why are we killing Black bodies? Like, why are we just taking these bodies out of the world? Don't you see their value? They are kings and queens. Why don't we see their value? And so I was like, okay, well, let's make a piece that shows kings and queens, because we are kings and queens. We have the potential of being born from kings and queens because our history was erased. We don't know. We don't get to know. Instead, we have to live with the idea of us being royal within our own bodies, so that the value can then expand outside of us and others can see that we have value as much as we see value for ourselves, right? And so I started illustrating these gold crowns on the surface. And I wanted them to start to edge themselves more into graffiti, because street art is a poor man's language, right? And I didn't want to exclude the primal instinct to just create. It's a primal instinct to just go out onto a street, grab a can of paint and just spray. To produce something, to produce an image, to create something is in all of us. And so I wanted to make sure that I showed that in some kind of way. And I started to take on these gold crowns in that manner, trying to produce something that began to edge on the world side of graffiti. And then I'm also someone who uses my idea of sweetgrass baskets formed in clay in order to kind of symbolize my ancestry. So if you don't know anything about the Gullah people are most known for their sweetgrass baskets. If you don't know anything about Gullah, the Gullah people exist on the East Coast, the coastal line, from the bottom of North Carolina through South Carolina, through Georgia to about the very top of Florida. And they're coastal people. And they are known for these sweetgrass baskets that really kind of is like something that we pulled from Africa. It came from Africa. It is a tradition from Africa where they were actually harvesting rice in Africa as well. But once we were moved here to the United States, we were still brought here to produce rice and indigo and other things as well, sea island cotton, all of these things. But they still use this tradition of these baskets to harvest. And over time, it became now an art form because we are no longer harvesting rice by hand. And so I wanted to kind of dive into this. And I didn't have the ability to make a sweetgrass basket because sweetgrass baskets are something that's passed down through lineages. You can sometimes, if you know it well, you can sometimes look at a basket and know what family it came from. Like that's how much it's passed down through families. And so let me also state, I grew up in New Jersey, born and raised. My family's from South Carolina, but I wasn't born in South Carolina. I wasn't raised in South Carolina. So I grew up on the outskirts of the culture. I grew up only going to see my people when I would go visit my grandmother during the summers. And so because of that, I never actually had anyone who could teach me how to make a sweetgrass basket traditionally. I don't know how to work the sweetgrass. I'm gonna figure it out for y'all. But I don't know how to do that. And that to me was unacceptable in grad school when I first developed making sweetgrass out of clay. To me, that was unacceptable. It's my people. Who's to tell me I don't get to hang on to something that belongs to my people? I do. And I'm gonna find a way to. And for me, what material did I know? Clay. So I said, okay, well, this is how we're going to hang on to it. We're going to produce it in a material that is permanent. They can never be taken from you again. It can be smashed down, but it can never be taken from you. It still exists in its form. So I was like, okay, yeah, perfect. I am going to figure out how to model sweetgrass out of clay. And so I use that to express my relationship to my ancestors, but as a way of reclaiming and claiming who I am as a person and the roots in my ancestors, because my ancestors, thank God, are everything to me. They guide me even now. And so while making my work originally, I was moving the sweetgrass basket design to the bottom of my pots. And they were supports because I was reading it as like, you stand on your culture, you stand on who you are, you stand on what was laid before you were even here, right? So to me, they needed to be on the bottom and they needed to mimic the way that my ancestors were doing those sweetgrass baskets on the bottom. And these pieces are called elephant ears, by the way. And I did not, at this time, feel that was still necessary. The sweetgrass still holds up the body. It still is the thing that supports the body. But why should the elephant ear part of the sweetgrass need to exist at the bottom? It doesn't. Why can't it be the thing that shows we're regal, right? So I began to move it up on the forms themselves, and they began to take on the form of fashion, where now this looks like a body armor, right? Like standing against like mess, you know what I mean? And so, and even in this one, it begins to take on to me a skirt to me, it looks like a dancing body. The joy, bringing in joy into my works of art is major. And so even though I layer it with all of these duality moments, joy still exists in the work. And I want and need that to always exist in the work. And so this is a piece that tends to not actually have much joy in it, but I wanted to share it with you. This piece begins to show a flag. It is a flag, let's put it that way. And I wanted to show you how my flag came together. So this piece is about 184 cups. It's about 11 feet long, 8 feet tall, and 3 inches wide. So it's nice and shallow, but it's big. And so with this piece, this is in presentation, metaphor in presentation. And for me, this piece represented me talking about America, right? Obviously. But in this piece, there are two, of course, dual meanings, or there's duality that exists in this piece too. So this piece, if you stand far enough back, you will see that it is the American flag with all 50 stars now, but also embedded within it is the 13 original colonies flag. And so that to me needed to become one, because to me, like my cups, they exist in a space that the past and the present is still now, like hand in hand. What we saw in the past still is existing in the present. And so to me, they both needed to become one. The original 13 colonies flag, as well as the current American flag as well. And each star on there is not a star, it's a cotton boll. And so the name of this piece is Birth of a Nation When Cotton Was King. And so this piece is something near and dear to my heart, but I can't install it anywhere, just anywhere, it's huge. But then there's red, of course, and the white, and it's just needing to show that dual meaning for me as well. And so that's all for me.
Welcome so much, and we have some time for questions. If anyone has any, the gallery's open, so we can always end by going and see the work now that we've had the privilege of getting to know the context a little bit more about actually Sharon's work along with the rest of the 35 guys. So, but we'll have the time for questions. Maybe y'all can.
I have a couple of questions. You said that you had put the cotton on the pieces. So that was after you fired it, and then you did or did you do it before the firing?
So my process on that one a little bit. Okay, so actually I slip trail them. So it's before the firing while the clay is still leather hard, because you don't want to slip trail too late because it'll start cracking and breaking off and flaking off. You want to make sure it's still leather hard.
Okay.
Medium leather hard.
Okay.
When you apply slip to the surface.
And with the cotton, real cotton. You say real cotton?
No, that's just drawings of cotton.
Okay.
Yep, but I'm slip trailing them in.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't know why I was thinking of real cotton.
That's okay. Real cotton does show up in my work in presentation though, but not necessarily on the surface.
You mentioned with the cups that recreated the like scarification that you wanted people to feel the texture, and I wondered if like how does allowing folks to interact with the pieces and like actually like especially Black folks to actually feel the pieces, like how do you hold space for that in the exhibition that you do of your work, or are you making things for exhibition and you also make works for folks in the community that
get a tactile feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't think of it much in the exhibition space because when I do exhibitions, I think of more installation work.
Mm.
So there's a journey in the room that I'm trying to produce. So I don't necessarily do it in the room, but I'm always a fan of people picking up the work because if you don't pick it up, you don't get to feel that. But for me in particular, it's important for the work to exist outside of my own house. So it's like, get out, you know, and anyone who wants it, I try to get you a piece because it is important that you touch it. You don't understand it unless you touch it. And so I'll have to think about bringing it into the space inside of the exhibition as well, and not just where it becomes all about experience in the room. Because that's a good one. Yeah.
Well, I had another question about the firing techniques. About, you said you fired 5 times,
Multiple times.
multiple times.
Yeah, low fire.
Low fire
Mhm.
or high fire first, or just,
Well, the found objects, those are already glazed pieces. So this would be an overglaze application that I'd be applying to the surface. So it's a low fire for these ceramic heads, about a 0.17 to 0.19 I fire. And so you know, I would layer the marks on. So I do a firing, and you know, 3 hours later, I think maybe 6 hours later after cool down, I'd be able to look at it, apply some more marks, refire until I have a composition that I'm happy with.
I was struck by your reference to chop up. And I was just thinking with these other pots that you made with the flag, is chocolate the coin of the realm for you?
Is chocolate the what?
The coin of the realm? Or in other words, is it all made up in all chocolate color?
Yeah. I mean, ever since I discovered that clay, I don't make it in anything else.
Really?
Yeah, I don't make my work in anything else. I think maybe one day, I'll shift out and try something different again. But I mean, honestly, as long as I keep viewing Black Bodies as this luscious thing I want to lick, nope. For now, it works.
okay.
I have a question, more of a comment for you, Sharon. Watching you go from the ready-made object and overlaying that, which comes out of the Industrial Revolution, which still touches on labor. But even when we think of early pottery houses, women were mostly painting on those surfaces, and that by the time you look at the new pieces that you've reintroduced your hand, which is always a struggle talking about in the classroom, like leaving the evidence of the hand in the presence of the person, you completely shifted the relationship of the pattern and what signifies the object, that you know it's Royal Albert or Staffordshire or Diffin or wherever it comes from, its origin. Now those coils exist on their own, and the surface is on that form now, along with the hair, which I think for me is that moment of the joy. Both of the things existing in the space. I just wanted to comment on that because that's like an inside ceramic thing.
Yeah, and I was trying to say, yeah, like with that, definitely like my process, like my undergraduate was in painting. So I wanted to be a painter for a really long time. But I would make these ceramic objects and people were just always so inspired by it. The reaction I got from my ceramic is not what I ever got from my paintings for some reason, which is really weird because I don't really make the kind of ceramic objects I did before. But it's kind of like my way to, it allows me to bring in all my love of painting and, you know, and ceramics. So it's like marrying the two in a very creative kind of way.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to ask any more questions.
I'll just,
We have 2 comments come through the chat on the Zoom call. The first from Christine, saying thank you for these wonderful talks, and I look forward to seeing the exhibition in person. Congratulations. And the next from Evelyn, typing in, while this is an amazing presentation, in both of these works, there seems to be a necessity to identify and create a history. Because there's so much erased history and so much left to unravel, how do you both balance using history and motifs within your work, and also tying into your own experiences, And then part two, is it difficult to make work in a way that people will not consider political?
That's a good question. That's like a real packed question, isn't it? For me personally, I definitely feel like, it's impossible for me to make work that folks do not consider political because of my vantage point. I am speaking to the world from my experience, and my experience is definitely going to the work that I make. So, and I think for me, definitely that's why the drawing becomes like really lovely, because it becomes a space where, even though I'm operating in this kind of like politicized kind of space, I'm still able to exist in this way. And I think the work is very timely for me because it allows me to imagine what things might have been like for others in the past. Because I think about those things, what would my life be in this space? Like, would I still be able to find joy in these areas, in this space, right? So making the work is kind of like my way of connecting. And I do think about how I curate my colors or my ideas. I generally don't tend to do like a lot of read. I don't do a lot of read. I mean, I've read a lot as a kid, but don't anymore. But so I generally don't read and then make work. I tend to like a lot of stuff. I feel like, we learn so much that we don't even realize we're learning. And then, the way we respond to the world is based off the thing that we've learned. So I'm trying to like unpack those things. So some of the stuff that I'm putting into my work, I notice it's pinks and it's these things. And so all the time, I'm always thinking, are these colonial? And a lot of my imagery goes back to this like very colonial kinds of Rococo style. Like if you look at my studio, you'd be like, oh my God, it looks like a grandma's china ware. Like there's a certain aesthetic, right? And so I'm always trying to figure out, how did I come to find those aesthetics appealing? Like what is it about these pinks? As a woman, why am I attracted to this pink color? And I feel like through my work, I'm able to unpack and question, how I come to this. And in unpacking it, I feel like it allows me to bring other folks into that space so they can see how they participated in this sort of like learning, or in terms of this history. I oftentimes look at my work and think of it as a way of, like it's a double-edged sword for me, because I feel like it's almost like beauty. You say somebody's beautiful, but you're also, participating in violence, right? Because if you're calling someone beautiful, then someone must be ugly, right? Right? If someone's beautiful, then there gotta be somebody that's ugly as well, right? So that's kind of like how with my work, I'm trying to sort of like unpack why it is I believe the things I do the way that I believe them. And so that's where my materials come in, and that's how a lot of my articulation happens in my studio.
I'm not gonna lie, Kyle, I'm gonna need you to repeat that.
Part one, two-parter. Because there's so much erased history and so much left to unravel, how do you both balance using history and motifs within your work while also tying it into your own experiences? And the second part was, is it difficult to make work in a way that people will not consider political?
Okay, so yes, it is difficult to make work that doesn't seem political, but I kind of consider myself sitting in a political space too. For it to be non-political, then I feel like I wouldn't be standing up saying the things that I'm saying. I'm standing up and saying the things I'm saying. So it's political, right? Even though it's coming from my own space and my own personal vision, right? It's still those things. Now, a lot of my work, at least the way that I handle my surface and my motifs, comes from the fact that I also was a fashion designer for a long time. I also, I went to school for fashion originally, and then I worked in the industry while also going to undergrad for ceramics and all my other stuff that I've tended to tag myself into. I also worked in the industry for a really long time. I worked in alterations, and I worked in a bridal shop at that. I worked for David's Bridal for 7 years in the alterations department. Wow. And so I worked on a lot of things that I just deemed really beautiful. But what I saw in a lot of those spaces, and what I got from a lot of the things that I was doing with fabrics, was pattern. And so pattern for me means everything. If there's not a pattern that exists on my work, you should question whether or not it's mine, because the pattern's gonna show up in some form, because fabric for me means a lot in the sense too that I had, like, my grandmother is the one who taught me how to sew and how to make a quilt and how to sit and be this labor of love, that then your finished product gets the heat and warm and comfort all of the people within your family. You get to wrap this around you and feel that comfort and that joy. And so, like, it for me, fabric and pattern and why my motif exists in the way that it does is from my grandmother. My grandmother's gonna be just like, oh my God, you talked about me so much.
Yes, ma'am.
That's it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Well, we do have the opportunity there, would like to, you can go through the gallery, in the gallery from your, so I think